Have you ever heard of someone buying a mansion for the price of a vending machine soda and discovering it was the only thing standing between her child and the streets? What if I told you that in the wealthiest country on earth, over 38 million Americans live below the poverty line, but one of them stumbled into a secret so powerful it rewrote 130 years of family history? And what if the house she bought for a single dollar didn't just change her life? It exposed a hidden legacy built by women who refused to be forgotten? This isn't a fairy tale. It's the kind of story that only desperation can write. The kind that reminds us how thin the line is between collapse and destiny. Today, we're diving into the unbelievable journey of Maya Carter, a single mother whose life had been shattered long before she ever set foot inside the crumbling Holloway Manor. What she found there would challenge everything she believed about luck, survival, and the quiet revolutions built by women who came before her, ready to see how a broken life, a broken house, and a single dollar intertwined into something extraordinary. Let's begin. They say every storm has an eye, but Maya Carter had lived so long inside the hurricane that she forgot calm even existed. Before the mansion, before the dollar, before destiny whispered her name, there was only the fall, the long, brutal descent into a place where survival wasn't a goal, but a minute-by-minute negotiation. Maya was 36 when everything collapsed at once, though truthfully, she'd been balancing on the edge for years. She worked overnight shifts at a warehouse where the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than the workers, and then sprinted to the early morning bus so she could clean offices before the city woke up. And after that, she slung coffee at a roadside diner where people ordered hope they didn't know she couldn't afford to give. Still, no matter how she hustled, the bills multiplied faster than her paychecks. In America, where nearly 61% of adults live paycheck to paycheck, Maya had slipped into the majority long before she understood the math of poverty. But the day her landlord taped the eviction notice to her peeling apartment door, bright orange, bold letters, 72 hours to vacate, was the day the world stopped pretending she had options. Her son, 11-year-old Jonah, asked if they were moving somewhere warmer since she kept packing blankets into trash bags. She told him yes, because sometimes a lie is the only shelter a mother has left. Their old Ford made a ticking sound every time it started, like a bomb counting down, and she drove it through neighborhoods where normal lives were happening behind clean windows and trimmed lawns. She drove past people walking dogs, buying groceries, living lives that didn't require negotiating with despair. And the weight of knowing she couldn't give Jonah even the smallest piece of that ordinary safety gnawed at her until she could barely breathe. There's a moment in every fall when you realize there's no bottom, just new layers of hurt waiting. For Maya, it came when she stood in the welfare office, clutching paperwork she didn't understand, surrounded by tired faces that mirrored her own. The clerk told her the wait list for housing assistance was 8 to 10 months. Jonah, who'd been dozing on her shoulder, lifted his head just long enough to whisper, "Mom, we won't be homeless then, right?" She nodded, though her throat burned with the truth. That night, after the diner shift ran late and her boss reminded her tips were earned, not owed, Maya drove Jonah to a Walmart parking lot and told him they were camping. He believed her. Children often believe because the alternative is too heavy for them to hold. But for Maya, That night inside the cold car was the moment she understood something quietly devastating. She had no more miracles left. No relatives to call, no savings to tap, no backup plans. Just a tank of gas she prayed would last until morning, and a child who deserved more than life had given him. And yet, inside that darkness, something sharp and stubborn stirred. Desperation doesn't always crush people. Sometimes it carves them into survivors. It was in that fragile, exhausted state that she overheard a conversation at the diner about a county auction selling off old properties. Cheap, abandoned, forgotten places. A rumor, a whisper, nothing more. But when you're drowning, even rumors look like lifeboats. That is how Maya's fall didn't end with defeat, but with a choice. A small one, a desperate one. The kind people laugh at from the outside. But choices made at rock bottom have a different weight, a different courage, a different truth. And this small, reckless decision would lead her towards something she couldn't have imagined if she tried. Because sometimes the bottom isn't an end, it's the doorway to the strangest beginning. The morning Maya walked into the county courthouse, she carried exactly $14.32 in her pocket, the sum total of her worth after years of holding a collapsing world together with nothing but grit and exhaustion. She'd slept less than 3 hours, washed Jonah's face with water from a gas station bathroom, and driven the wheezing Ford until the engine coughed in protest. She didn't know why she came. Rumors weren't solutions, but when life corners you, even the faintest possibility feels like a door you have to try. Inside the auction room, everything smelled like old carpet and forgotten paperwork. A dozen men in pressed suits flipped through thick binders, whispering to each other, the kind of people who bought buildings to flip, not to live in. Maya stood in the back wearing a thrift store jacket with a broken zipper, trying to look invisible. Her heart hammered so loudly she wondered if anyone else could hear it. Property after property rolled by, numbers she couldn't comprehend. 8,000, 12,000, 28,000. She listened to the bids rise like waves she had no boat for. She almost walked out. What business did a woman who couldn't buy groceries have bidding on real estate? But then the auctioneer sighed, shuffled a stack of papers, and announced something that made the entire room still. Next property. Holloway Estate. 92 rooms, 37 acres, structural collapse in multiple wings. 15 years in tax default. Opening bid, $1. Someone laughed. Someone else whispered, demolition property. Another shook his head, muttering, not worth the asbestos cleanup. But Maya didn't hear them. She heard Jonah's voice from days earlier, asking if they would be homeless. She heard the silence of that Walmart parking lot. She saw the eviction notice in her mind like a warning flare. $1. She had $1. And suddenly the absurdity didn't matter. Poverty teaches you that logic is a luxury. Survival isn't. When her hand rose, she didn't plan it. It rose like her body remembered something her hope had forgotten. The auctioneer blinked, confused, like he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Ma'am, did you say $1? She nodded. The room turned, eyes heavy with judgment. In America, people often look at the poor like they're irresponsible for daring to want anything better than bare survival. But no one else bid. Why would they? It wasn't an investment. It was a burden disguised as architecture, the kind of house no sane person wanted. The gavel came down with a hollow crack that echoed through Maya's bones. Sold. $1. And just like that, with a coin she could have spent on a bus ride, Maya became the owner of a mansion big enough to swallow her life whole. On the courthouse steps, the clerk handed her a manila envelope containing the deed and a set of iron keys, so old they looked like props from a museum. Maya stared at them, trying to reconcile the reality. She had traded her last shred of safety for, what? A ruined giant on a hill? A house held together by rot and memory? But something surprising flickered inside her, fear and excitement braided together. Sometimes the craziest choices are the only honest ones left to make. Because desperation doesn't always lead to destruction. Sometimes it leads to reinvention. Her lesson wasn't about risk. It was about refusing to let the world shrink her to nothing. As she drove toward the distant mountains, where the estate sat buried under thyme and vines, she felt the shift happening inside her. She was terrified, yes, but she also felt something she hadn't felt in years. Movement, possibility, a strange pull toward whatever waited behind those gates. The house might have been broken, but so was she. And sometimes broken things recognize each other. The gravel crunched beneath the Ford's tires as Maya climbed the winding road toward the place that now, on paper at least, belonged to her. The trees grew thicker with every turn, the branches arching over the road like rib bones of something ancient watching her approach. Jonah slept in the passenger seat under an old blanket, unaware of the magnitude of what awaited them. Maya gripped the wheel, her palms slick with fear and anticipation. Ahead, through the thinning fog, iron gates appeared, rusted, crooked, swallowed by vines. A stone pillar leaned sideways, carved with 4 faded letters, Halloway. She pushed the gate just enough for the Ford to squeeze through, the metal groaning as though warning her to turn back. But she didn't. That's the strange thing about desperation. It has momentum. Once you're in motion, it feels harder to stop than to continue. The driveway stretched long and winding, lined with broken branches and years of neglect. She stopped twice to drag limbs out of the way, her shoes sinking into mud. And then, as the last curve opened, she saw it. The manor, or what was left of it. 92 rooms of collapse and silence. A castle-sized skeleton rising from the fog, the east wing gutted by time, the west wing sagging inward like it was exhaling its last breath. Window frames gaped empty, the roof line jagged like broken teeth. And yet, even in ruin, the structure demanded attention, the kind of eerie beauty that comes from things built to last, beyond their intended lifetime. Maya stepped out of the car slowly, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. She felt Jonah move behind her, silent, taking in the sight with wide eyes that held both wonder and worry. Inside, the foyer smelled of earth, mildew, and abandonment. Light filtered through broken stained glass, scattering colors across cracked marble floors. A chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, half its crystals missing, casting ghost-like reflections on the walls. The grand staircase curved upward in a sweep of elegance that didn't match its current state. Half the steps bowed, one completely missing. Every sound, the drip of water, the shifting of wood, the distant echo of wind through empty corridors, felt amplified, like the house was listening. Maya lifted her flashlight, its beam trembling as much as her hands. She expected to feel fear, but instead felt something she couldn't name. A sense that the manor wasn't just abandoned, It was waiting. Jonah clung to her side as they moved room to room. In what must have once been a music hall, a piano sat with its lid broken off, keys warped by moisture. In the dining room, a massive table remained, though one leg had collapsed, sending silverware scattered across the floor like forgotten confessions. In the library, books lay dissolved into piles of paper pulp, their stories melted by time. And yet, every room held a ghost of its former life, a whisper of what it once had been grand, bright, alive. Jonah nudged her sleeve. "Mom, did people really live here?" She nodded, unable to form an answer that wouldn't crack her voice. There were places she wouldn't let him step, where the floor sagged dangerously, where mold climbed the walls like veins, where the air felt colder in a way that wasn't physical. The west wing was the worst, its corridor tilted, door frames warped, wallpaper peeling in long strips like shedding skin. But even in this decay, Maya felt the mechanics of her own desperation working. She found herself analyzing, calculating. Could this be patched? Could that be rebuilt? Which rooms could be salvaged first? Poverty trains the mind to scan for survival routes, even in ruins, especially in ruins. She realized the house felt familiar in its brokenness. It mirrored her life, cracked, unstable, dismissed by society, and yet somehow still standing. Then came the locked doors, 3 of them on the first day. The first on the second-floor landing, its iron hinges pristine compared to the rot around it. The second hidden behind a fallen bookcase in the library. The third tucked under the central staircase, a small door with a modern padlock that didn't match the century-old architecture. Maya tried the keys the clerk had given her, but none fit. Jonah watched her, curiosity buzzing off him. "Mom, what do you think is inside?" She shook her head, but her chest tightened. Secrets, always secrets. Houses like this weren't built without them. People like the ones who owned them didn't live without hidden stories. But she pushed that thought down. She had more immediate concerns, like how 2 human beings would survive their first night here. As evening fell, the temperature dropped fast. They returned to the front room Maya had mentally labeled possible shelter. It had intact windows, a small fireplace, and walls that didn't appear ready to collapse. She swept debris into a corner, laid out 2 blankets on the floor, and tried the fire. The smoke choked her before she realized the chimney was clogged with years of ash and maybe nests. They made do with flashlights and thick jackets instead. Jonah, despite everything, whispered, "This is kinda like camping." She smiled, though her throat tightened. Children have a talent for softening the jagged edges of reality. And this became the quiet lesson of the night. Despair doesn't announce itself loudly. It seeps in through the cracks, settling beside you like an unwelcome guest. But so does resilience. Maya didn't collapse under the weight of the house's ruin. She absorbed it, piece by piece, allowing the magnitude of the moment to shape her without breaking her. The manor was a monster, but it was also a mirror, proof that even in collapse, something could still hold a shape. Something could still be rebuilt. As they lay on the hard floor, Jonah sleeping with his hand tucked under her arm, Maya stared at the broken ceiling and let the realization sink in. This ruin was their only chance now. It was unlivable, overwhelming, and utterly impossible. But so was homelessness. So was starting over. So was surviving poverty for as long as she had. And yet here she was, And here they were, together, inside a house that seemed just as desperate for a second life as she was. In the quiet hours before dawn, as the wind threaded through shattered windows, with a low, mournful whistle, Maya made herself a promise. She would try, one room at a time, one nail, one sweep, one breath at a time. Because sometimes survival isn't about fixing everything. It's about choosing one place to start. By the second night inside Holloway Manor, the excitement of discovery had settled into a colder, harder truth. They weren't exploring an old house. They were surviving inside a corpse. The manor breathed in strange ways, its bones shifting with temperature drops, its walls exhaling drafts that carried the scent of rot and old winters. But desperation rearranges the mind. It teaches you to turn terror into routine, to rename danger as inconvenience, to pretend that instability is adventure, especially when a child is watching. And that's exactly what Maya did. She woke before sunrise, her joints aching from the hard floor, and quietly checked the corners of the room for signs of rodents or loose nails before Jonah stirred. The air was so cold that every exhale turned into a ghostly cloud. Yet when Jonah blinked awake, she smiled, like this was part of a grand plan. "Morning, champ. Ready for day 2 of our adventure?" He nodded, pulling his blanket tighter, unaware that the night had been long and heavy with sounds Maya had no explanation for. Soft thuds in distant corridors, a metallic clink from somewhere upstairs, and what felt like footsteps above them, though the ceiling was half missing. Their days followed a rhythm of necessity. First, warmth. Maya layered Jonah in 2 shirts, a hoodie, and a jacket, then wrapped a scarf around him like armor. The portable stove became their lifeline, heating water one tiny pot at a time. They ate instant oatmeal, steam rising like a small promise. Then came safety checks. With a notebook in hand, Maya mapped every space they dared enter. Sturdy hall, semi-sturdy hall, do not enter hallway, collapse risk corridor. She marked rooms where the floor dipped, where the ceiling bowed, where black mold bloomed like bruises along the walls. Jonah followed behind, scribbling his own notes. Cool window, scary shadows, do not walk here. Mom says no, but I want to explore later. His innocence softened the heaviness of the house, but it didn't erase Maya's awareness of the danger. Every creak sounded like a threat. Every gust of wind sent her heart pounding. At night, the real battle began. The darkness inside the manor felt heavier than ordinary night, thick enough to touch. Their lantern cast a narrow circle of light, while everything beyond remained swallowed in shadow. Jonah would fall asleep quickly, exhaustion catching him like a net, but Maya stayed awake, listening, watching, fighting the urge to let panic swallow her whole. Fear behaves strangely in broken places. It amplifies. The whistle of wind becomes a whisper. The settling of wood becomes footsteps. A tapping branch becomes someone knocking. Maya wasn't superstitious, but the house seemed too alive to be empty. Once, around midnight, she heard faint music, just 3 or 4 soft notes, coming from the direction of the old music hall. She froze, breath locked in her chest, every instinct urging her to grab Jonah and run. But there was nowhere to run to. Their car barely survived the uphill drive. They didn't have money for gas or a motel. Their only choice was to stay. And so she coached herself the way she'd coached Jonah. Fear is just a story your brain tells. It goes away when you tell a louder story back. She repeated it like prayer until her pulse steadied. That was the harsh truth of survival mode. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the choreography of it. The strategy of pretending you aren't terrified so the people who depend on you won't be either. During the day, she played upbeat music from her phone to drown out the house's groans and murmurs. She opened curtains to let light in where glass still remained. She asked Jonah to help her clear debris, turning it into a game. Who can find the oldest object? Who can sweep the biggest pile? Who can spot the strongest beam? Each tiny victory became a thread, holding them together. But the deeper challenge wasn't the house. It was the psychological shift of being cut off from the world. No electricity, no heat, barely any phone signal. And the creeping truth that they were utterly alone in a place too big for two people. Isolation does strange things to the mind. It amplifies every doubt, every fear, every whispered insecurity. There were moments when Maya felt the weight of her choices like a physical pressure on her chest. Moments when she looked at Jonah, bundled in blankets, and thought, "What have I done?" Moments when she nearly broke. But each time, Jonah would catch her sleeve, excited by some discovery. An old portrait half buried in dust, a doorway that led to another smaller doorway, a carved banister still intact after decades. His wonder became her anchor. His belief in the adventure helped her believe, even if only for a few minutes at a time. Still, the manor didn't make it easy. One night, a section of ceiling in the adjacent hallway collapsed with a thunderous crack, waking them both. Dust rained down like gray snow. Jonah screamed. Maya grabbed him so tightly he yelped again, but she couldn't loosen her grip, not until long after the dust had settled. She soothed him with shaking hands, whispering reassurances she didn't fully believe. They slept, sitting up that night, too afraid to lie down, and yet, by morning, Maya was already moving, already planning, already patching the hole with a tarp and pushing debris aside, because that's what survival mode demands, failing forward, standing even when your knees want to fold. Despite the terror, a strange bond began forming between mother, child, and house. Holloway Manor was broken, but so were they. And there's a quiet truth about broken things. They understand each other. Maya felt it in small moments, when a draft brushed her shoulder like a nudge, when a stuck window finally opened after she spoke Jonah's name, when dust motes danced in light, as though welcoming them, rather than warning them away. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she believed in history. And the manor's history was thick in the air, pressing in on them like a presence waiting to be acknowledged. Their makeshift camp slowly expanded. Maya swept the hallway outside their room, claiming it as safe territory. She set up a small food corner with canned goods, a water jug, and the stove. Jonah decorated the wall with a drawing of the house. His version had lights in the windows and a bright driveway. "This is what it will look like when we fix it," he said. Hope, she realized, is often drawn before it is lived. And each day their courage grew roots. Maya learned to tell the difference between the house's natural creaking and sounds she needed to worry about. She learned which steps groaned and which steps bit at her heels. She learned to carry 2 flashlights in case one died. She learned the shape of every shadow, the rhythm of every unexplained noise. And Jonah, despite the fear, began laughing again, short laughs, unsure at first, but real. Fear didn't vanish, but they learned to live beside it, to acknowledge it, without bowing to it. That was their growing lesson. Survival isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision, again and again, that something is worth facing it for. By the end of that first week, they had settled into something that resembled routine, but something else had settled in too. A feeling that the manor wasn't just deteriorating around them. It was revealing itself, piece by piece, like a giant puzzle, waiting for someone patient enough to see the full picture. Locked doors, hidden corners, rooms that felt different, almost deliberate in what they hid. Maya didn't know it yet, but the house wasn't just falling apart. It was guarding something. The discovery didn't happen with thunder or drama. It began with a simple draft of warm air brushing against Maya's ankle as she swept the corridor outside their makeshift camp. Warmth was rare inside Holloway Manor, so rare that it made her stop mid-sweep. She traced the draft back to a wall where the wallpaper had peeled away in curling strips, revealing old wood beneath. Jonah pressed his cheek to the wall and whispered, "Mom, I think something's breathing in there." She rolled her eyes gently at his imagination, but curiosity tugged harder than logic. She tapped the wall, once, twice, and on the third tap, the sound changed, hollow. She grabbed the flashlight and ran her hand along the molding. That's when she found it. A narrow seam, barely visible, like a line someone tried to erase long ago. With enough pressure, the panel clicked inward. A soft groan echoed, and the wall slid open, revealing a narrow passage swallowed by dust and darkness. Jonah squealed with excitement, but Maya's heart clenched with something sharper, a feeling she could only describe as recognition, as if the house had finally decided to show her something she was meant to see. Inside, the air felt older, denser. Their footsteps disturbed layers of dust that drifted like ash. The passage led to a cramped room, no bigger than a pantry, but its contents froze Maya in place. A wooden trunk rested beneath a grime-covered window, its surface carved with initials. E.H. Jonah, impatient, tugged at the lid. It groaned open to reveal bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, a brass locket tarnished with age, and a leather journal whose pages crackled when Maya lifted it. On the first page, in elegant handwriting, were the words, "Elvira Holloway." Private log. Jonah peered over her shoulder, whispering, "Who's that?" Maya didn't know, but something in her gut whispered, "This is where the story changes." She read the first entry aloud. It described a woman trapped by her era, restrained not by walls, but by expectations. Elvira wrote of being denied education, property rights, and autonomy by husbands, fathers, and laws that saw women as footnotes, not authors. Yet, she didn't surrender. Instead, she built a network of hidden rooms inside the manor, spaces for women fleeing abusive marriages, forced institutionalization, or societal shame. The passage they stood in wasn't just a secret room. It was a sanctuary, carved from defiance. Jonah listened wide-eyed as Maya flipped through sketches of escape routes, hidden levers, maps of tunnels, drawn with meticulous care. Some pages described women who arrived bruised, terrified, or pregnant with nowhere to go. Elvira offered them shelter, money, and escape plans. She was like a superhero, Jonah said softly. Maya nodded, feeling her breath catch. She was, she whispered, just a quiet one. The deeper they explored, the more rooms revealed themselves like chapters of an unfinished story. Another hidden door, this one behind a panel in the library, led to a workspace filled with tools, hammers, files, even early prototypes of safety devices, reinforced locks, disguised alarms, small personal weapons engineered with surprising ingenuity. Jonah picked up a small brass device, shaped like a brooch. Maya recognized it only after reading the handwritten note beside it. Anti-grip pin, for women cornered by unwanted hands. The weight of that invention, and the reason it had to exist, pressed on her chest. She imagined women of the early 1900s wearing similar devices, forced to prepare for danger even in their daily lives. The contrast stung deeply. A century later, women still carried keys between their fingers when walking alone at night, still avoided parking garages, still feared being disbelieved. Progress, Maya realized, often moves slower than pain. The next room hit her even harder. Behind a false fireplace panel was a modest bedroom, simple bed, small dresser, candle stubs melted to the floor, but on the walls hung framed photographs of women, some smiling, some bruised, some holding children close. Notes were tucked beside them. Anna, safe in Boston. Margaret, reunited with sister. Lillian, free at last. Jonah traced the frames with his fingertips. Mom, they hid here, like we're hiding. Maya swallowed hard, the truth settling deep. Not hiding, she corrected softly. Surviving. And in that moment she felt something unexpected, a kinship stretching across generations. The house wasn't just holding memories, it was holding purpose, maybe even waiting for someone who needed it as desperately as the women before her. Farther down the passage, they discovered a more recent door, steel, unlike the rest. A modern padlock secured it, rust streaking the metal. Jonah tugged impatiently, but it wouldn't budge. We need a key, he said. Maya didn't respond. She stared at the lock with a strange suspicion blooming inside her. Why would a decades-abandoned mansion have a modern lock inside a secret passage? Who had been here last? What were they trying to hide? She ran her fingers along the cold steel and felt something stir, a mixture of fear and curiosity. The kind that hinted the story beneath the house was larger, richer, and far less accidental than she had assumed. That night, back in their tiny camp, Maya reread Elvira's journal in the lantern's glow. The entries shifted from architectural notes to confessions, letters written to a woman named Deborah Thompson. Maya froze. Thompson, her grandmother's maiden name, a family line Jonah had once asked about during a school project, and one Maya had never fully understood. She turned the page, and her breath caught. There it was, a letter addressed not to Deborah, but to her descendants. A warning about men who sought to erase Elvira's work, about wealth she had hidden away from corrupt family members, about a legacy meant to be passed down only to women strong enough to survive hardship. Maya's fingers trembled as she read. For the first time, she understood the sensation that had followed her through the manor, the feeling of being watched, not with malice, but with recognition. Maybe the house wasn't haunted by ghosts. Maybe it was haunted by expectations. Through that long night, Maya absorbed lesson after lesson, buried in Elvira's words. How women throughout history had been forced to carve safety with their own hands. How community often arises not from abundance, but from shared wounds. How survival is less about strength and more about refusing to disappear. And as she turned the final pages, she found a sketch of the manor's blueprint, Except this wasn't the official one. This was the true map, showing every hidden passage, every secret room, every safe house built into the walls. At the center of the sketch was a symbol, a circle with a line through it. Jonah pointed to it sleepily. "What's that?" he murmured. Maya studied it closely. "I think," she whispered, "it's something we're supposed to find." The next morning, with the journal tucked safely into her jacket, she felt something shift inside her. The discovery wasn't just about history. It was a mirror held up to her own struggle. She wasn't the first woman to be cornered by life, forced into survival mode, pushed to the edge, and she wouldn't be the last. But maybe, just maybe, she was standing inside a house built for women like her, a house that had been preparing for her long before she knew it existed. And as she stepped back into the hallway, feeling the weight of Elvira's legacy on her shoulders, Maya couldn't shake the sense that this wasn't just coincidence. The locks, the journals, the sealed rooms, the modern padlock, something larger was unfolding, something that demanded answers. The knock came on a morning so cold that Maya could see her breath hanging in the air long after she exhaled. It wasn't the hesitant tap of a curious neighbor or the heavy pounding of someone angry. It was deliberate. 3 steady knocks, spaced with the kind of patience only people with power ever seem to possess. Jonah froze mid-bite over a granola bar, and Maya's spine stiffened. Almost no one knew they were here. No one should have been able to find them. She pulled on her jacket and stepped carefully over the warped floorboards toward the front door. When she opened it, she found a man standing beneath the sagging porch, tall, composed, wearing a charcoal coat, and the expression of someone who didn't fear collapsing roofs or ghost stories. He extended a gloved hand with perfect politeness. "Ms. Maya Carter," he said, "my name is Lucien Grant. I'm the executor of the Holloway estate." She blinked, stunned. "Estate? There is no estate. This place is falling apart." Lucien studied her with eyes too sharp to miss anything. "That depends," he replied calmly, reaching into his briefcase, "on whether you are who I believe you are." From the case he produced a folder, thick, sealed, stamped with a gold crest, identical to the carving on Elvira's journal. Maya's heart lurched. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, surveying the decayed foyer with cool detachment. Jonah hovered behind her, clinging to her sleeve. Lucien's voice carried effortlessly through the cavernous entryway. "Ms. Carter, the manor was designed to conceal its truth. Only a direct heir, a woman from a very specific maternal line, was ever meant to unlock its secrets." He placed the folder on a dusty table where sunlight split through broken stained glass. And yesterday, that lineage was confirmed. Maya felt the world tilt. "I don't understand," she whispered. But Lucien continued, explaining that Elvira Holloway had created a legal structure unlike anything the courts had ever seen. A trust hidden beneath layers of decoy corporations, coded wills, and sealed archives that required a descendant to physically reclaim the manor in order for the inheritance to activate. Not claim it in court, not sign for it at a bank, but actually walk inside and live in it long enough to be deemed unbroken in spirit. Maya almost laughed at the absurdity. She wasn't unbroken. She was held together with fear, stubbornness, and a child who needed her. But Lucien shook his head. "Strength isn't measured by ease," he said softly. "Elvira believed real power is formed in struggle. That's why she built a system no privileged heir could ever endure. He showed her documents dated over a century ago, outlines of the heir test, a sequence of conditions requiring the chosen descendant to prove resilience, moral clarity, and capacity for leadership. Maya felt faint. Leadership? She echoed. I can't even afford a real meal. Lucian didn't flinch. And yet, you managed to keep a child alive under circumstances that would have crushed most people. Elvira believed women like you, women overlooked, underestimated, pushed to the margins, were the ones most capable of rebuilding what was lost. Inside the file were the requirements. Phase 1. Endure isolation and adversity without abandoning the manor. Phase 2. Demonstrate moral courage by helping another woman in crisis before helping yourself. Phase 3. Unlock at least one of the sealed legacy rooms without instruction. If the heir passed all three within 90 days, the trust, estimated at over $200 million, would be transferred fully and irrevocably. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure whether to laugh, cry, or scream. You're telling me I have 3 months to prove something to a dead woman I've never met? Lucian's expression softened for the first time. Not to her, to yourself. His tone carried the weight of truth, but also something else, a quiet respect. Jonah tugged on Maya's sleeve. Mom, we found some of her rooms. Maybe that's what she wanted. Maya stared at her son, astonished by how easily children see destiny where adults see obstacles. She turned back to Lucian. And if I fail? His answer was immediate. The estate will be claimed by distant relatives who intend to demolish it and liquidate everything. The legacy ends, the sanctuary dies, and the women it was meant to protect will have nowhere left. The words hit her like a blow. She thought of the letters in the hidden rooms, the names of women saved by Elvira's defiance, the sketches of escape routes, the messages written for descendants, yet unborn. Maya realized this wasn't just a challenge. It was a continuation of a promise made long before her. But fear swelled in her chest like a tide. Who was she to carry something this heavy? She was barely surviving. She was drowning. And yet, Lucian's eyes held steady. The system is designed to eliminate heirs who seek wealth, he said. It rewards those who seek meaning. They spent the next hour reviewing terms by lantern light, while Jonah traced patterns on the dusty marble floor. As Lucian spoke, Maya saw the contours of a cruel but brilliant truth. The world seldom hands power to women like her. The world demands credentials, status, polish. But Elvira had built a test that ignored all of that. A test that asked only, can you endure? Can you protect others? Can you unlock what was hidden? It was a system designed by a woman who understood invisibility and built a legacy meant specifically for the invisible. Maya felt a slow burning resolve begin to form. Fragile, but real. By the time Lucian prepared to leave, the sky had darkened into a deep blue that pressed against the broken windows. He paused at the door, glancing back with an expression that told Maya he saw more in her than she could yet see in herself. One more thing, he said. The house responds to intention. If you're committed, it will reveal what you need. If you're not, it won't. Jonah whispered, like magic? Lucian smiled faintly. No, like legacy. When the door shut behind him, silence filled the manor, heavy, electric, expectant. Maya stared at the folder on the table, her heart pounding with fear and possibility. She had no idea how to pass these tests. No roadmap, no guidance, no safety net. But she did have one thing Elvira must have understood deeply. A woman with nothing left to lose is a force no system can predict. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after Lucian's visit. Not from the house, not from the secrets hidden behind drywall or rusted hinges, but from the gravel road outside the manor. Maya was repairing a loose board in the front hall when she heard engines, smooth, powerful, unmistakably expensive. She peeked through a cracked window just in time to see a caravan of black SUVs snaking up the drive like a dark omen. Jonah, who'd been sorting nails in a tin can, gasped, "Are they here to help?" But Maya's gut twisted. Help never arrived in luxury vehicles. When the doors opened, the air seemed to shift. 3 people stepped out, dressed like wealth itself. Tailored coats, polished shoes, posture that spoke of power inherited, not earned. Leading them was a woman with sharp cheekbones and colder eyes, her blonde hair pulled into a severe knot. She scanned the manor the way one scans a battlefield. "So," she said loudly, "this is where she's been hiding." Her name was Evelyn Halloway, a distant relative with no love for family history, but an insatiable hunger for its fortune. Beside her stood her brother, Richard, every inch the entitled heir, and a corporate attorney whose briefcase gleamed like a weapon. Evelyn approached the porch with the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no spoken to her with consequence. "You must be Maya Carter," she announced. "We've been expecting you." Maya stepped forward, shielding Jonah instinctively. "I don't know you," she said. Evelyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You don't need to. What matters is this house, and it doesn't belong to you." The words hit Maya like a cold punch. She tried to respond, but Evelyn continued, her tone dripping with practiced condescension. "Lucian may have filled your head with fantasies, but let's be clear. You have no legal standing, no education, no resources, no social credibility. You are a temporary inconvenience." The attorney opened a file and began reciting claims. Unsafe living conditions, potential child endangerment, trespassing allegations, even insinuations of fraud. Maya tried to interrupt, but Evelyn raised a manicured hand. "You expect us to believe you magically appeared as the rightful heir to a secret fortune?" She let out a soft laugh. "Please, you're here because you're desperate, not because you belong." Jonah, frightened and confused, clung to Maya's coat. Maya felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she refused to look away. Not this time. Not from people like this. Evelyn leaned closer. "Here's our offer. You leave now. We'll pay you $5,000. Enough for a motel, maybe a used car. It's generous, considering what you've done." She said the last word like an accusation. Maya stared at the envelope Evelyn extended, her vision shaking. $5,000. Enough to breathe for the first time in years. Enough to feed Jonah. Enough to run. But then she remembered the trunk of letters, the hidden rooms, the women who had once huddled in this house, praying for someone to believe them. She remembered Elvira's journal, the legacy meant for the invisible, not the privileged. Maya lifted her chin. "No," she said quietly. Evelyn smiled as though expecting that answer. "Then we'll destroy you the proper way." The war began immediately. Within days, Maya received a notice from Child Protective Services, an anonymous tip alleging that Jonah was living in hazardous conditions. She knew exactly who filed it. CPS arrived with clipboards and stern expressions, their questions cutting through her defenses like knives. Jonah, flustered, tried to explain their camping routine, how they were fixing the house, how this was temporary, but the social worker only frowned. A child sleeping on a floor in a collapsing building? This is unacceptable. Maya fought to stay calm as panic clawed at her chest. She explained the truth about the auction, the trust, the renovations, but without documents to prove stability, without electricity or running water, her words sounded like excuses. The social worker warned her that Jonah might be removed if conditions didn't improve. When they finally left, Maya collapsed to her knees, shaking. Jonah wrapped his arms around her. "Mom, they won't take me," he whispered. But she could hear the fear in his voice. Soon the smear campaign began. Local news stations aired stories about a squatter mother endangering her child in a condemned mansion. Websites posted grainy photos, clearly taken from behind the trees bordering the property. And social media, fast, cruel, spread accusations from people who had never stepped foot inside the house. The comments were merciless. Irresponsible mother, drug addict, mental instability. Maya read them until her vision blurred. The wealthy didn't need truth. They needed narrative. And they were experts at crafting one that made her look small enough to crush. Lucian returned unexpectedly one evening, his usually calm demeanor sharpened with urgency. He spread court filings across the dusty table. "They're trying to fast-track a petition to seize the property," he said, "claiming you're unfit, unstable, and trespassing. They want to terminate the air test before you can complete it." Maya felt hollow. "Can they?" Lucian hesitated, just long enough to reveal the danger. "If you give them reason, if you break, if you leave, if you lose hope." His voice softened. "They are counting on that." It was then, in the depth of that fear, that Maya realized something. The wealthy didn't fear her. They feared what she represented. A woman with nothing discovering she had been chosen for something powerful. A bloodline they couldn't manipulate. A legacy they couldn't control. Elvira had designed the system so that money couldn't buy the inheritance. But Evelyn and Richard weren't accustomed to losing. And when powerful people fear losing, they become dangerous. Maya fought back the only way she could, with truth and endurance. She documented repairs, cleaned rooms, attended mandatory CPS meetings, and dragged herself through each day with the determination of a mother who had run out of exits. She didn't scream or retaliate. She simply refused to disappear. And slowly, she learned a brutal but necessary lesson. The world often believes the wealthy before it believes the wounded. It trusts the polished over the struggling. It listens to the loudest voices, not the truest ones. But strength, Maya realized, comes from surviving misrepresentation, not letting it rewrite who you are. Jonah stood by her side through it all. One night, as they sat with their lantern flickering against the wall, he looked at her with steady eyes. "Mom, if they try to take our house, I'll tell them we belong here." She brushed a hand over his hair, overwhelmed by the clarity in his voice. "We don't run," he added. It was a small sentence, but it rooted her again. By the end of the week, Evelyn escalated the conflict. She filed an emergency injunction to demolish the manor, claiming it was structurally unsafe for the public. Construction vehicles appeared at the bottom of the hill. Bulldozers. Maya felt the ground shift beneath her. They weren't just trying to take the house. They were trying to erase the evidence of everything Elvira had built, her sanctuary, her secrets, her history. If the manor fell, so did the legacy. So did the women's stories. So did Maya's chants. But something else had been stirring in the shadows of the house, something Maya had almost forgotten. The sealed steel door, the hidden blueprint, the symbol in the journal. She realized the answer to fighting back wasn't in the courts or the news. It was inside the walls, inside the legacy Elvira left behind. The morning the injunction was overturned felt strangely quiet, almost anticlimactic, as if the world hadn't caught up to the fact that something monumental had just shifted. Lucian arrived with a rare smile, small, controlled, but undeniably proud, and handed Maya the official court document. "The demolition is halted," he said. "You've proven the heirs acted in bad faith, and the judge agreed that removing Jonah would cause more harm than good." Jonah whooped, arms thrown around Maya's waist, but she barely heard him. Her hands trembled as she held the paper, the weight of it sinking in slowly. She had won. For the first time in years, maybe ever, something had gone in her favor. Yet the victory felt surreal, like standing on solid ground after months of drowning. Lucian's voice softened. "This was the first battle, but I think you've bought yourself time to finish what Elvira intended." Then he added, with a gentleness that almost broke her, "She would have been proud of you." Maya nodded, but a knot tightened in her chest, a mixture of relief and fear, triumph and disbelief, because winning in the outside world didn't mean she had won in the one inside her. That truth came crashing in later, when the sun dipped low and the manor fell into its familiar hush. Jonah slept, curled under a blanket, unaware of the unraveling happening just feet away. Maya sat alone on the cold floor, the lantern flickering as if mirroring her spiraling thoughts. The events of the last weeks kept replaying in her mind. The accusations, the threats, the cameras, the fear of losing Jonah, the constant tension she had swallowed to keep moving. She had fought so hard to prove she belonged here, to protect something larger than herself. But now, with the war momentarily paused, her body finally understood it wasn't in danger. And that's when everything she had been holding back surged. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Her breath came shallow. Tears spilled before she could stop them, hot and relentless. It felt like breaking. But it wasn't the kind that ruins you. It was the kind that reveals you. She covered her face, ashamed of falling apart when she should have been celebrating. But trauma doesn't wait for convenient moments. It waits until the fight is over, until you're still, until the silence is loud enough to hear every buried fear crawling back up. She tried to quiet her thoughts, but they roared. "You're not enough. You don't deserve this. They were right about you. You're broken. You don't belong." The house around her felt too big again, too heavy, too expectant, like it knew something she didn't, like it was holding its breath. For the first time since arriving, Maya whispered the question she had been avoiding. "Why me?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "Why a woman like me?" She wasn't expecting an answer, but the wind slipped through a cracked window, brushing against her cheek like a hand. It wasn't supernatural, just circumstance, but in that fragile moment, it felt like acknowledgement. She lifted her head and wiped her face, forcing herself to breathe slower. She looked toward the steel door she had failed to unlock earlier, the one that seemed deliberately waiting for her. The journal mentioned a final key, not made of metal, but of clarity, of seeing oneself the way Elvira once saw the women who sought refuge. Maya realized she hadn't passed that test yet. Not truly. She had survived, yes, but she hadn't believed she was worthy of anything more than survival. And worthiness was the one door she had never managed to open. She stood, steps unsteady, and walked toward the hidden corridor. The lantern cast long shadows that made the passage look alive. At the steel door, she placed her palm against the cold surface. "I'm afraid," she whispered. Admitting it out loud felt like peeling back armor. "But I'm still here." Something in her voice shifted, small, fragile, but undeniably present. She thought about the women in the photographs, the ones Elvira sheltered. None of them had arrived confident. None had arrived whole. They were bruised, desperate, frightened. They came because they had nowhere else to go. And Elvira took them in, not because they were unbroken, but because they were human. Maya closed her eyes and said what she had never dared to say. "I deserve a chance, even if I don't know what to do with it yet." When she opened her eyes, she saw it. A small metal plate near the doorframe she hadn't noticed before. She brushed off the dust. Beneath it was a recessed compartment holding a thin brass key. Simple, almost delicate. Her breath hitched. This wasn't magic. This was design. Intention. Elvira had built this place for someone like her, for a woman who would only find the key after admitting the truth about her own fear. Hands trembling, Maya inserted the key. The lock turned with a slow, echoing click that resonated deep in her chest. The steel door groaned open, revealing a chamber unlike any other in the manor, a room preserved with care, lined with documents, blueprints, bank ledgers, and sealed files containing the full structure of Elvira's trust. On the central table rested a letter, addressed not to a name, but to a role, the woman who endures. Maya approached it as if approaching something sacred. She opened it, her breath catching at the first line. "Strength was never meant to be loud. You are enough as you are. The legacy lives in your refusal to disappear." Tears welled again, but this time they carried a different weight. Relief, recognition, something like healing. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about being fearless. It was about choosing not to vanish, about accepting a story larger than the one life had forced on her. In the silence of that hidden room, Maya allowed herself to believe, if only for a moment, that she was capable of more than survival, that she could carry this legacy, that she wasn't chosen by accident. She exhaled slowly, a breath that felt like it had been waiting her whole life to be released. The turning point was not the victory outside. It was the one happening within her. And as dawn crept across the manor, warming its battered bones with soft light, Maya walked back to Jonah with the certainty that they weren't just staying. They were beginning. The transformation didn't begin with construction crews or dramatic announcements. It started with a broom, a bucket of soapy water, and Maya's quiet determination, something steady and sacred that grew inside her the moment she opened Elvira's letter. The manor, once a decaying labyrinth of shadows, slowly began to remember what it once was, a place built for protection, for healing, for women who arrived carrying their brokenness like heavy luggage. Jonah helped scrub floors with childlike enthusiasm, humming along to an old radio they found in the attic, while Maya cleared one room at a time, uncovering pieces of the manor's history as if brushing dust off buried truth. Every wall she cleaned felt like peeling back grief. Every window she opened let in not just light, but possibility. They found old blueprints tucked inside the sealed chamber, designs for expansions that Elvira had never completed, rooms labeled transitional wing, crisis suite, mother-child quarters. It was a blueprint for a future she hadn't lived to see. Maya realized with a shiver the house hadn't been built to be a fortress. It had been built to be a refuge. Once the trust fully transferred to her, quietly, without ceremony, as though power didn't need applause, Maya sought out contractors willing to take on the impossible. Most laughed. Some refused. But a handful saw the spark in her eyes and agreed to work in phases, starting with the structural stabilization of the West Wing. Maya spent hours with them, learning everything: how to read load-bearing walls, how to identify safe wiring, how to choose materials that honored history without compromising safety. She wasn't just rebuilding walls, she was rebuilding herself. Lucian assisted where the law was involved, guiding her through permits, zoning regulations, and non-profit formation. And Jonah, now old enough to understand the magnitude of what they were building, became her quiet compass. "This house helped people before us," he said one night as they painted a newly repaired room. "Now, we get to help them too." The transformation attracted attention, not the invasive, predatory kind the news had drowned them in months earlier. This was different. Social workers, advocates, and shelter volunteers heard whispers about the manor's rebirth. Women in need began writing letters, survivors of domestic violence, single mothers escaping homelessness, teenagers aging out of foster care with nowhere to go. Maya read each story with a lump in her throat. She saw herself in every line: fear, exhaustion, hope flickering like a weak flame. She remembered how impossible survival had felt before this place found her. "We'll make room," she promised each letter, even when she wasn't sure how. But one by one, rooms were completed. Beds were brought in. Soft lamps, fresh paint. Handmade quilts donated by women from a nearby church. The manor, once cold and lifeless, warmed with human breath, footsteps, and the quiet hum of second chances. And then came the moment that redefined everything. A nonprofit director reached out, offering to partner with Maya to create a statewide women's sanctuary program. With the trust's resources and the manor's vast property, they could open satellite locations, small safe houses connected through a unified network. They called it the Halloway Network, after the woman whose vision had slept inside the walls for over a century. Maya traveled to meetings in thrift store blazers, speaking not like an executive, but like someone telling the truth. She described sleeping in a car, fighting CPS, surviving on granola bars, and fear. She described finding secret rooms that held the echoes of women who had walked the same path long before, and people listened, not because she was polished, but because she was real. Donations trickled in, then flowed. Volunteers arrived. Architects offered pro bono work. The broken house was becoming a movement. Jonah, now a teenager, added something unexpected to the legacy. Using scraps of tech from yard sales and a borrowed laptop, he designed a discreet safety app, an emergency signal disguised as a calculator. With 2 taps, women could send their location to the network, triggering coordinated support from local teams. A shelter worker tested it and cried. Within 6 months, the app saved 3 women from imminent danger. Jonah didn't brag. He simply said, "I wanted them to feel like help would come, like you came for me. Maya held him and understood that healing doesn't just repair, it multiplies. As the manor expanded, so did its purpose. Workshops were held in the refurbished ballroom, financial literacy classes, trauma-informed support circles, legal aid sessions, child care training. Survivors became mentors, mothers became leaders, teen girls became advocates, women who once whispered now stood tall, their voices filling halls that had spent decades in silence. Maya watched them reclaim themselves, and each time she felt that old fear inside her shrink a little more. This was no longer about surviving the house. This was about letting it breathe again. The house wasn't haunted. It was awakening. The greatest lesson of this transformation came quietly, almost unnoticed. Change does not require perfection. It requires persistence. It requires compassion. It requires someone willing to say, "We begin today," even if their voice shakes. Maya realized that the world often expects the broken to stay broken, to shrink, to apologize for needing help. But the manor taught her that there is profound strength in those who rebuild from ruin. They understand cracks. They understand endurance. They understand how to transform pain into shelter for others. The Holloway Network launched officially on a crisp autumn morning. Reporters came, but this time Maya stood tall behind the microphone, Jonah beside her, a crowd of women behind them. Women with stories, women with hope, women who deserved every second of this moment. The manor gleamed in the background, no longer monstrous, but magnificent, a symbol of reclamation, a home reborn. And as Maya finished her speech, she caught sight of a woman at the edge of the crowd, thin coat, trembling hands, a toddler on her hip. Her eyes held the same exhausted fear Maya once carried. She realized then. The story wasn't ending. It was circling. The legacy Elvira planted was no longer hidden in secret rooms. It was alive, growing, reaching. The knock at the door that winter evening sounded almost identical to the one Maya had heard months earlier. The same hesitant rhythm, the same quiet plea hidden beneath borrowed strength. Maya paused mid-conversation with one of the resident mothers, feeling a familiar shiver move through her. She crossed the foyer, now warm and golden with restored lighting, and opened the door slowly. Standing in the cold was a young woman in a thin sweatshirt, her hair tangled by the wind, a toddler clinging to her hip. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but beneath the exhaustion was something else Maya recognized instantly. That trembling mixture of fear and hope that only appears when someone is down to their final, fragile choice. I'm sorry, the woman whispered. I heard this place helps people. I didn't know where else to go. For a moment, time folded in on itself. Maya saw her own past, superimposed on the woman's trembling frame, the Walmart parking lot, the eviction notice, the nights in the car. She stepped aside and said the same words she once wished someone would say to her. You're safe. Come inside. As the woman crossed the threshold, her child buried their face in her chest, overwhelmed by the warmth. Volunteers rushed forward with blankets, hot tea, and quiet reassurances. The woman's shoulders sagged with relief, the kind that comes only after carrying too much for too long. Maya led her to the intake room, speaking softly, listening to the fragments of her story, an abusive partner, a quick escape, a long bus ride, and the growing fear that the world had forgotten her. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't question her worthiness. She didn't judge. She simply nodded, recognizing each wound like a mirror. When the woman finally looked up through tears and whispered, "Why would a place like this take someone like me?" Maya smiled gently. "Because it was built for someone like you." It struck her then. This was the true purpose of the legacy. Not the mansion, not the trust, not the history hidden in dusty rooms, but this moment. A door opened, a life changed, a circle completed. That night, after the new mother and her child had been settled into a freshly renovated room, the lamp casting warm, soft light over crisp sheets, Maya stepped outside onto the balcony overlooking the property. The wind moved through the trees like a quiet choir. She closed her eyes, imagining Elvira standing where she now stood, a century earlier, dreaming of the women she would never meet, but hoped to save. Maya whispered into the cold air, "They're coming, just like you thought they would." And she felt the truth settle deep in her bones. Desperate women don't create chaos. They create empires because they know how to rebuild from nothing, how to stitch purpose out of pain, how to turn survival into solidarity. The Holloway Network wasn't a monument to suffering. It was a testament to the strength found at rock bottom, the kind of strength society never sees until it transforms the world. The next morning, news spread through the manor that the first satellite safe house had opened in Chicago, followed by another in New Mexico. Donations poured in, not from wealthy patrons seeking tax breaks, but from everyday women who had once known despair and now wanted to pass forward the lifeline they never received. Survivors became volunteers. Volunteers became leaders. And slowly, without fanfare, a movement grew, one saved woman at a time. Maya watched the network expand with a mixture of awe and humility. She didn't feel like a leader. She felt like a survivor who had been given a key to a door she was once afraid to open. But that was the secret. Leadership wasn't about grand speeches or perfect choices. It was about opening the door at the right moment, for the right person, with the right heart. And the manor itself seemed to breathe easier. The walls no longer groaned with loneliness. The rooms echoed with laughter, conversation, healing tears, whispered hopes. Jonah, now taller and more confident, walked the halls with the posture of someone who had grown up inside a revolution. He helped the new children adjust, taught them how to use the safety app, and in the evenings he would sit beside Maya on the front steps, watching the lights flicker across the property. "Do you think it'll ever stop?" he asked one evening. "The women coming?" Maya shook her head gently. "Pain doesn't end, but neither does hope. There will always be someone who needs us, and that's okay. That's why we're here." Years later, when people asked Maya how she built an empire that changed the landscape of women's safety across the country, she never talked about the money or the buildings. She never talked about the legal battles or the inherited trust. She talked about moments. The knock on the door, the cold night in the car, the fear of losing her child, the discovery of a journal written by a woman who believed deeply in the unseen. She talked about the truth that had shaped her life, that desperate women don't stay broken. They build, they rise, they lift others with them. They turn haunted houses into sanctuaries and forgotten legacies into futures. And on the final night of her first year running the network, Maya stood once more at the manor's main entrance as another woman approached, hesitant, trembling, trying to hide her bruises beneath a jacket too thin for winter. Maya walked forward, heart steady. "I know," she whispered. Before the woman spoke, "I've been there too." She opened the door wide, letting warm light spill into the night. "Come in. This house was built for women like us." And with that simple gesture, the circle continued, quietly, powerfully, endlessly, just as it was always meant to. If this story moved something inside you, tell me in the comments. Do you believe desperation can be a kind of power? Have you ever made a $1 decision that changed your life?